let's start with the Health Secretary Wes Streeting's suggestion this week that weight loss injections like semaglutide, what's that, I hear you cry? Well, it's more commonly known as Wegovy or Ozempic, could be used to reduce worklessness in the UK. Will, you wrote for the website this week saying that while obesity is, of course, a serious issue, this isn't going to solve unemployment. Unpack that a bit, please.
I mean, certainly not on its own. I think there are two things. First of all, there's what this says to the public, which is, hooray, we've got a Labour government, great. Oh, and we're going to start injecting the unemployed with drugs to suppress their appetites and make them work harder, which is just a very weird kind of dystopian sounding policy. I mean, there is clearly a very significant problem with obesity. There are about 2.8 million people who are out of work due to long-term illness. And lots of those people have overweight or obesity or have diabetes, which is related. When you speak to economists who work in this area, what they say is that actually there's a really wide and complex problem of mental illness, musculoskeletal problems, and they are quite geographically concentrated in areas that are economically deprived. So the logic that would make sense to most people is that people who live in economically deprived areas are more likely to be out of work, and therefore, as a lot of other research has shown, job loss is associated with weight gain. The logic of this policy seems to be that if you get rid of the weight gain, then you get rid of the job loss, which doesn't really seem to make sense to me.
Except I'm going to push back there because NICE, the National Institute for Care and Health Excellence, when it's produced its guidelines and when it approved this class of drugs, it did recognise that the social stigma associated with being overweight and obese can actually affect your career prospects.
Yeah, and there was, I think there's a German study also that's shown that being overweight or obese can impede you getting back into work. So I wouldn't dispute that. But treating obesity as the cause of worklessness itself, rather than treating worklessness as the cause of obesity, seems to me the wrong way around.
But is that what it's doing? If isn't it acknowledging that being obese and overweight is preventing people getting back to it? It's not saying it's caused it. Then helping that, does that not?
True, but I think
that makes sense, doesn't
it? To a government that has spoken a lot about the kind of sticking plaster policies of their predecessors, to then come in with what looks very much like a sticking plaster because it is treating the end of the system, not the beginning of the system. It's not, it's not saying why is there such a massive divergence in health outcomes between people in London and people in deprived areas for other parts of the country. It's not saying what you need to fix are the economic problems that lead to people losing their jobs and becoming obese. There are lots of obese and overweight people in London who face no such problem getting employed or re-employed because London's economy performs so much better than the rest of the country.
I'm very sympathetic to what Will has said. I'd add a few things, however. One, there's no doubt that the cost of obesity in this country is enormous. It's estimated to cost the NHS 11 billion and astonishingly estimated to cost the British economy 100 billion a year. That's a lot more than the investment summit raised earlier in the month, for instance. So it is a really, really big issue. And these drugs have been available for a bit longer in the States. And hey presto, for the first time, I think ever, American obesity rates have stalled and are coming down a little bit. So there is something going on there. But I do think that it is one of a toolkit of answers. And perhaps ministers have got a little bit enthusiastic about literally a jab to solve unemployment. So there's an awful lot more to do.
I mean, Will, you used this word dystopian just a couple of minutes ago, and there has been pretty intense criticism of the plan. The Health Secretary has been termed Ozempic. But at the same time, I hear what you guys are saying, but is there not a bit of overreaction here? This is a trial. That's good science, right? They're not saying it will work. They're saying, NICE have judged that this is a factor. We will do a trial, which means all of those people are going to be really carefully monitored. The drug is only approved in those with, a high enough BMI, with other associated health difficulties. You have to have a healthy calorie controlled diet at the same time. Isn't it worth trying? That's how we find out if things will work.
I think so, yeah. And I think,
It's not going to be mandatory.
It would be mad to say, let's not try new solutions to things involving new drugs. And I think one thing to say, though, is that these drugs, the semaglutides and what they call GLP-1 antagonists, I think is the wider group, they don't actually make you better, they make you thinner. So if you have a number of health issues, as a lot of people do who aren't able to get back into work, being thinner won't necessarily change that. It will mean that you are ill, but you weigh less. I think the reason behind the reaction is probably more to do with what you're going to do about the underlying economic causes of this problem. Why are you making the headline about this one relatively small good idea? It's because it's being used as a kind of magic bullet, right?
And I think that's partly because if you are, for instance, the Health Secretary, there is very, very little you can do at the moment in the short term. I mean, we're waiting for the budget. He's going to get a very, very good settlement, Wes Streeting, I think, in the budget. But there's very, very little he can do in the short term. But they can do this. This is one thing they can announce. So they announce it. And I agree with Will to the extent they make too much of it. Nevertheless, I've got friends who've been on these drugs and they are delighted with them. We don't know what the long-term effects are going to be. We don't know what happens when you come off them after a longish period. We don't know whether ultimately you have to be on them for the rest of your life.
Well,
you're
only meant to be on for 2 years, aren't you, is the current guidance.
Lots of question marks. And of course, the one they're trialling, so that's not Ozempic they're trialling, it's Mounjaro, which is the Lilly drug. That's the one they're trialling in Manchester for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Do you think, how do you think it looks that this is announced at the same time that the drug company behind these injections has pledged, a multi-million-pound investment, as you say?
That is what the investment is for, isn't it? It's £276 million, I think, for a 5-year trial of this drug in Manchester. And I agree with you. I think that seems a sensible thing to do. And if they're putting up the money, this is the time to announce it. So I'm not too excited about that. Yeah,
as Andrew says, I think it's, the drug company itself spending a fair bit of money. I believe the government is also going to be spending a similar amount. For me, the concern would be that it's announced as part of a deregulatory agenda. There was Stan was on stage the same day talking about slashing away at red tape, and certainly, in terms of planning red tape, there's a lot that obviously needs to be done there to boost economic growth. But at the same time, if you have a health secretary talking about overregulation and talking about doing these things on the one hand, but one of the reasons that there is such a crisis of obesity in this country and in other countries is the way that that food is regulated, and that that market does not seem to be producing good health outcomes for the general public. And if you're talking about deregulating, but also coming up with a quick fix for the consequences, that seems quite concerning to me.
Do you think, though, Wes Streeting did an interview with the New Statesman a month or so ago, and actually, if I just read you some of what he said, perhaps this is actually just completely consistent with that. So he says, I'm not remotely interested in being the fun police or telling people how to live their lives. What I do recognise is that people are becoming sicker sooner in life, and we've got to push chronic disease and illness into later life because it's good for the economy and it's how we make the NHS financially sustainable. Arguably, this is consistent with that, right?
Well, that means also really pressing down hard and, in Will's term, regulating against ultra-processed, ultra-sugary, cheap foods, because we all know that's where you get the easy, cheap calories from, and we all look around us on the streets and we can see the results.
Well, and sadly, those foods are much cheaper to buy than healthier foods.
Yeah, and also if your working hours and conditions means that you don't have time to cook, or that you're very tired a lot and you need a couple of energy drinks to get going in the day, then that's not going to be great for your long-term health.